All right. Praising God for the process through which he makes us genuine, understanding that no matter how hard we try, it can be difficult to speak accurately all the time, even when you're always trying to tell the truth, because we just, as humans, have limited sight. But God submits us to a process that can make us genuinely earnest people. And so let's call this chapter earnestly, because that word is going to literally come up, I think, in the last verse of the chapter, which it will. In this chapter, Hosea chapter 5, where we want to just begin at verse 1, giving a rundown on this chapter that gives us another view of God's coming judgment to Israel. But he's also going to open it up to Judah, understanding that he's promised to show them mercy in these days. Down the road, as we have mentioned, they're going to make some of the same mistakes and attract some of the same judgment. Understanding that, he's going to start talking about that at least a little bit now. In verse 1, he starts out once again calling out the priests, also the house of Israel and the house of the king of Israel, saying that they have become a snare at Mizpah and a net spread upon Tabor. It essentially sounds like, this is my understanding, that they have become a snare to the people. Why? Because in verse 2, he's going to say that he is coming against, or the slaughter has already overtaken the revolters, but he is going to get all of them, understanding that God does not shoot passes to people based upon who's who. Everybody is going to have to stand before God to give an account for what they have done, whether right or wrong. And so he is saying at the end of verse 2, he's going to get them all, even if he has overtaken the revolters in the slaughter as of right now, or as of the moment of this prophecy. It's going to go on to describe what the day of discipline, or the day of the discipline of the Lord, is going to look like, as he goes on to talk to Ephraim, saying that their deeds, or the deeds of Israel, are not hidden from him. They are caught in a situation where their deeds do not, in verse 4, seem to permit them to return to God. It's not clear whether or not it is simply by stubbornness, because he's going to go on to talk about their pride, or whether or not they have simply gotten themselves caught in a situation where they just can't return. But it's one of the reasons why we harp on chapters 3 and 4 of Hebrews, which say, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart, because it doesn't take very long before we can get ourselves in some situations we cannot get ourselves out of. And that seems to be where Israel is now, as he is going to go forward in verse 5 to, as we mentioned, talk about the degree to which their pride plays a role in what is ahead for Israel, saying that they will stumble, understanding at the end of verse 4, I forgot to say, that in wherever it is they're stuck in a situation, as we mentioned in the previous chapter, where they no longer seem to know God. And for that reason, both Israel and Judah can look forward to days ahead where they will stumble. At a certain point, they're going to stumble to a degree where they're going to actually want to find God, but it's going to be too late, because it's going to seem that they are so estranged from him that they can't find their way back. Going on to say that it is making sure that the judgment against them is assured, as verses 8 and 9 start out. Verse 8 saying, sound the alarm, because it's on deck. And verse 9 is saying it's absolutely sure what's about to happen. The judgment is going to overtake, in verse 10, the princes. Verse 11, once again, he's going to direct it at Ephraim. And then in verse 12, as we mentioned, it's not only going to be Ephraim, but down the road, it's going to overtake Judah as well. Understanding that in years past, Israel actually partnered with Assyria, a relatively wicked nation, but he is going to use that nation that they ran to, or those people they ran to for help, regardless of whether or not they were wicked. He is actually going to use those wicked people to turn on them and take them into captivity, describing himself in verse 14 as a lion, that once again, because of all of the evil they have done, God is going to describe himself as turning against them. Going on in verse 15 to say, after he has turned against them by tearing them and taking some off into captivity, he is going to sit and wait until they, in the last verse, or the last part of let me just read verse 15. He's going to say, I will return to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face, and in their distress earnestly seek me. Reminding me of some things I skipped over because I wanted to summarize them concisely. It seems that we learn a lot about the process through which he brings them into earnestly seeking him by understanding the process of his discipline. Verse 2 literally saying he is bringing days of discipline on them. Verse 9 giving us a little bit more specificity, saying that, as we mentioned, they have gotten to a point where they've strayed so far. Unlike the days in which he's willing to show mercy, the punishment heading toward them is assured. More importantly, the style that he is going to use to basically get to their minds, at least the minds of those who will be left after the days of destruction, is to basically eat away at their possessions like a moth, and not only their possessions in terms of their stuff or the things they might wear, but their very dwellings. He is going to describe himself as dry rot to the house of Judah before he goes on, as we said before, to describe himself as a lion who will tear some of them, leaving them as only a fraction of what they were before he goes off to his place to await the day that they finally confess the things that they've been doing wrong.